want to kind of stick with the young guy, and I feel like for the first 2 months of the season, full transparency, I think a lot of people are on his ass. There was a lot of conversations about Jalen Duren of effort. So I wanted to ask you guys this, Wes. I'll let you go first, like on this segment. Like, what do you think is like really clicked for Jalen Duren? Because you look like October, November, December, like the effort defensively wasn't there, but like as of late, like this guy is like protecting the rim. He's kind of point Duran, if you will, in these DHO situations. Like, what do you think is like really clicked for him to like kind of like step up his game?
So I think that truthfully, the thing that has gone right for, or the things that have gone right for Jalen Duren are the things that he was already generally pretty good at, which is extremely common. Okay, so that's not a slight on him. I don't mean it in that way, but if you look at what he's always excelled at, it's offensive rebounds, it's lobs, and it's occasionally flashing a little bit of some passing chops, right, on a backdoor cutter. He's been especially good recently hitting Ausar Thompson on backdoor cuts when he's been up in the high post. The point Duran thing in transition's been iffy, to put it lightly, right? There have been some good and some bad, probably in equal quantity. I do still think he has a turnover issue, but it's encouraging to see the assists go up. So what's interesting, at least for me, with Jalen Duren is he's gotten better as a rebounder. His energy, his effort is certainly improved, right? His level of focus is absolutely improved. And I think that leads to him being felt a little bit more when he's out there on the court. But when you talk about his defense, his deflections per game per NBA.com have not improved. His blocks and steals put together, his stocks over that month of February, where everyone is singing Jalen Duren's praises, they actually went down. Okay, so for a big 2 stocks per game, not fantastic, just kind of a base level expectation. In February, he was down to 1.5. In January was the first time this season he actually got over that 2, and it was just at 2.1. So I say all this to say he's still not an impactful defender. What has happened is he has been more energetic on that end. It's not led to more deflections. It's not led to more rim protection, but it's led to him getting in the way more, which is really good when you pair that with his offensive side of the game improving, right? That chemistry that he has with Cade Cunningham is real. His impact as an offensive rebounder and it's just like a low volume scorer is real. So what's clicked for him? It's just, I think at this point, experience, both in JB's system and then with Cade Cunningham. So they've got that chemistry. He knows what his job is, where he's supposed to be. But if we're still looking long term, and I don't think we should lose sight of this, if he's going to be a big man that cannot shoot the basketball, then you have to trade off his ability to make passes, right? His playmaking ability with his kind of wanting defensive output with those stocks and deflections per game. And you pair that with the fact that he's not necessarily a fundamental defender either. We're starting to see a little bit more of that, but like I still have a lot of issues with his hands and drop coverage. I think the Nets game was the best he ever looked at that, and it's now reverted back to form in the 2 game since. Point is, long term, I still think that that's the major question with Jalen Duren. And as great as it is to see his efficiency and the things that he does well continue to improve, you still have to have that big time, long term question with his defensive ability, especially given that it actually got worse in February, much closer to where he was last year rather than earlier this year.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I think the compete level on defense has definitely looked a lot better. Like the interesting thing, like Wes mentioned, is and he's coming off a couple like solid games with the career high 6 blocks against Brooklyn, follows that up with 4 against Utah, and then the Clippers game had gotten foul trouble early, had a ton of trouble with Ivica Zubac. Like I'm willing to throw that game out. Would love to see Duren like block shots at the level he did in those couple games a little bit more, because the 2 games before that Brooklyn game, I guess we can blow it out to the 4 games before that, he had just 1 block total over those 4 games. So I think it's just about continuing to just play with that effort, because Jalen Duren's admitted it himself. Like he started the year like not going as hard or whatever the wording was that he used. And I feel like you can just see a little bit of a difference because, like Wes said, what he brings on offense. How good he is as a pick and roll partner with Cade, a lob threat, can pass a little bit sometimes make poor decisions, but that player, that archetype is definitely important in the NBA. Like you saw the trade package that the Lakers were willing to give up for Mark Williams, and I'd be willing to bet they would have given up the same, if not a little bit more, for Jalen Duren, just because I think Williams is a little bit better of a defender than Duren, but Duren is like much more available than Mark Williams is, which is super important. So I think, and especially when you have a primary on-ball guy like Cade and like the Lakers do now with Luka, like they want to play with those big men who can roll to the rim. It's just like finding ways to continue impacting the game. And Anthony, you brought it up in the chat, same as Mr. Ray, like the time in when we've seen the discourse around Jalen Duren like turn more positive and just an upward trajectory sort of coincides with Ausar getting ramped up fully back up to speed and just having the good stretch of basketball that he has as well. So I definitely think that plays a little bit into it as well.
Yeah, I think to Mr. Ray's point, I think that maybe kind of goes unnoticed with Ausar just being out there because I think if you're just watching basketball and you're not really focused on a player, Ausar pops out on the screen because of how much ground he covers, not only just on the perimeter, but the weak side. And I think with Duren, just my assessment, he might not be getting the blocks or the steals, but he's bothering the shots where there's actually like a body in front of the rim. And for the first 2 months of the season, there was multiple possessions where he was just getting blown by, smaller guards, stronger forwards, or even like the perimeter defense. I think we could like attribute to like maybe, Karl Anthony Towns really early the Knicks game where like they just destroyed us from the perimeter. Even Miles Turner to an extent, like he's doing a much better job of trying to close out in the perimeter. First couple of months of the season, he wasn't doing that. I think this the overall effort is better, and having a guy like Ausar to cover a lot of that weak side help has probably made Duren's job in life a hell of a lot easier.
Yeah, definitely. And look, I mean, I think that the difficult kind of assessment or difficult question to bring up with Duren recently and over the stretch with Ausar kind of covering him, like you mentioned, like you have to realize that his defensive output was so strongly negative last year and early on this year that when he's now increased his energy level, right, his give a crap, right, it's just normal bad now. He's still not good. He's still not even neutral. You bring up that he's contesting shots. He's contesting shots, but he's late on rotations still very often. He still turns his hips way too often out on the perimeter and gets blown by quite a bit by guys that aren't that quick. Ausar Thompson is working wonders to cover up some of this shortcoming. What we're seeing now is a defensive system that is basically geared to treat Ausar Thompson kind of like an old school dominant defensive center, and that everything gets feeded to Ausar if the Pistons can control it. I mean, they are switching to Ausar. They are sending Ausar as a roamer on the baseline. They are doing everything they can to get him nearer the ball, right? Which is usually the way you used to play defense with like Ben Wallace or someone like that. So I think that shift has really helped Jalen Duren, of course, but long-term, you still kind of have to have the question, if he's not going to be a shooter and he's just going to be a lob threat big, then he needs to be a much better defender. And the fact that he had 2 games against the Nets and against Utah where he actually flashed being that rim protector this year is a problem. That's still not great. That's 2 games out of, where are they at? Like 60 something?
Yeah,
at
there's
the
like
moment?
20 games left.
Yeah, 20 games left. So that's still not good. And if you're thinking long-term about extensions here, like I'm open to it, but it's tough when you're still looking at a guy who is producing like a really great backup big. And that is effectively what you're getting out of Jalen Duren right now. That's not a negative, right? But you've already got one of those. So how do you handle the center rotation going forward when you actually want to take a leap? And if your choice is between a guy like Ausar Thompson, who, I mean, Omari said it a couple times, but he like teleports out there. He's almost a defense unto himself. If your choice is between that and lob threat big of Jalen Duren, like, I think maybe you got to go looking for floor spacing.
Yeah, I know a lot of people have been like very vocal about getting like more front court depth, especially at the forward or even the center position throughout the season. Honestly, like the more I watch Duren, especially defensively, I do agree with you. I think there's multiple times where he does get beat. And just kind of having Ausar out there is just being like that Swiss Army knife of just covering so much ground, not just for Duren, but for Tim Hardaway Jr. At times,
and Beasley,
like
too.
with
How much
Beasley.
he pressures the ball and gets beat off that. I mean, sometimes he makes the steal, but it's a high risk play with Beasley out there.
Yeah, I mean it's honestly kind of crazy. It almost kind of reminds you of like, I'm not comparing the two, but like kind of like how Tayshaun Prince used to just be like a Swiss Army knife, where he would just cover so much ground for everyone on the team. But like going the work team didn't need too much out, but like when they did get beat, he was there. What Ausar's doing right now is like, if you just watch a Pistons game, just watch how much ground that guy covers, because it's honestly incredible, like how good of a defender he is already in the second season.
If he played the whole year, I think he's getting all defense consideration on one of those teams. I mean, he's been unreal.
Yeah. It's like I will say about, and I think there are similar defenders. I think it's a crime that Dyson Daniels isn't the front runner for defensive player of the year. And like, I could see Ausar being on that trajectory eventually. And with Duren, I think another like interesting point is, does the defensive concerns stand out more if you don't have Isaiah Stewart off the bench, who I think is, I mean, one of the best rim protectors across the league this season. And then Wes, you brought up like the extension conversation. If Duren has proved enough to you to give him like similar money to what you gave Isaiah Stewart and adjust it for the increased cap, like, okay, what does that mean for the future with Isaiah Stewart with the team? We saw what happened when he was in the starting lineup. Obviously different scheme, asking him to do different things, but then you still need your, I guess, franchise center as well. So I think like right now, just the situation with having Ausar on the floor next to Duren, having Stewart off the bench, I think it's working well. I think the more interesting thing is like how Langdon decides to go about it in the future. But yeah, that's his decision. I'm happy it's not one that I have to make.
Final little just like stats point to bring up a little bit of what you were talking about there, Blake. But with the difference between those two guys, Stewart and Jalen Duren, Isaiah Stewart is contesting about one additional shot per game. He's playing 6 less minutes. That's a big difference.
Yeah.